Good morning, folks. Good to see you again after last week and the last couple weeks. Thank you for being here this morning. I have the pleasure of introducing Reverend Dr. Kathy Kelsey, who is, she's so many things in many ways for Iliff School of Theology and the Methodist Church and the spiritual direction community and all sorts of places that her diversity of experiences take her. We are happy to have her with us this morning to talk a little bit about what it means to reimagine spiritual well-being. As we come out of a pandemic time where we have been alone sometimes or lonely sometimes, depending on where or how you've been, and sometimes we have felt God's presence and sometimes we have missed God's presence. And some of us may still, from time to time, miss God's presence. I know I do from moment to moment, depending on the news. It feels absent or present for me from time to time. And so I will welcome Kathy, who I'm hoping is getting back to her ice skating following an absence here. I know that was a deep spiritual practice for you that you mentioned missing during this pandemic time. Kathy has been a wonderful colleague to me, a wonderful friend to me, and I believe she always has something interesting to say, as you can see by the feathers, and if you don't have a feather yet, I'll get you one as we go. But I look forward to hearing what she has to add to our spiritual life together this morning. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Jason. I love the way that ringing sound just invites one to be with it, to be with the sound and to open our hearts and our minds to just be present in this moment. We'll come back to that thought in a bit. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you this morning and to be invited to open my heart and to see what I can share with you that might be a gift to you as we reimagine spiritual well-being together. Spiritual well-being in Christianity is where I'm going to focus this morning, and I'm focusing in Christianity because that's what I know from the inside. And because it's the tradition that I'm going to assume that most of us sitting here and listening later, it's the tradition that we share. So I'm not going to try and argue that spiritual well-being in Christianity is better or worse than other options. It's just ours. So why not explore it? Spiritual well-being, in the ways that we have been doing it prior to January 2020, the cultural, American cultural versions of spiritual well-being have included showing up for worship regularly, showing up for Sunday school regularly. You all got this nailed. Doing daily devotions most days, or giving to the church regularly. They're all doing things, doing particular things. Can you think of some others? Can you think of some other things that we have admired or said to ourselves, oh, they must be spiritual? Folks who go on retreats or volunteering. You took the word out of my mouth. In Methodism, if you're really super holy, you fast. But you might lead worship or lead a class. You might sing in the choir or send your kids to church schools or to summer camp. You might even attend a revival meeting. Those are all ways of doing that we have associated with spiritual well-being in our culture. But in the Christian contemplative traditions, from the desert mothers and fathers of the 4th century all the way through the mystics of the past and the present, contemplative traditions have defined spiritual well-being just a little bit differently. They've defined it as a life lived with God. Loving God and loving all of our neighbors, moment by moment by moment. Spiritual well-being in the contemplative tradition looks like Jesus. It's fully human, fully embodied, and yet fully open to divine presence, fully engaged with all of our neighbors, moment by moment. Or another way to say it, spiritual well-being is a life lived aware of God's presence in this moment and fully, maybe at the center of our vision, or maybe aware of God's presence on the periphery of our vision. Or yet another way to say it, well-being is a life lived in response to divine love in this moment. And that's not mushy, or at least it doesn't have to be mushy. Justice is the structure that love requires. Thank you to an ethicist from Princeton for that wonderful phrase. Justice is the structure that love requires. And perhaps the final way to say it, or at least for the moment, spiritual well-being is a life lived aware in this moment of our source and of the transformations to which we and the whole of creation are invited. Most simply, being aware of being alive, of our breath, of our laughter in a moment. In this moment. So sit for a moment with it, whichever of those phrases resonated with you. Spiritual well-being is... What feelings arise for you as you sit with that phrase? What feelings arise as you sit with that phrase? Help me out. Joy? It can be relief. Oh, I don't have to do all of those things. I just need to be in this moment. It can be comforting to us. Spiritual well-being is a kind of hanging out with God who loves me more than I am able to love myself. But it can also elicit uncertainty or even anger. How am I going to know when I'm being aware of or with God? Enough. This is all mushy and without accountability. and I don't like it. Let's stay with those feelings for a moment. The fear and the anger. From the desert fathers and mothers to the present day classic, in fact, I brought it with me, Will and Spirit by Gerald May from 1982. For that whole almost 2,000-year history, we have been clear that we should expect that our healthy ego, our healthy sense of self, is not going to be thrilled about not being in control all the time. Our healthy sense of self stays in control. And so when we start talking about spiritual well-being as being present in this moment, open to God, open to neighbor, what is happening right now, our ego says, oh, wait a second. I've got to take care of the things that I'm feeling about what happened in the past, and I've got to get ready for the future and make sure that bad things don't happen and be prepared for them in case they do. And I've got to do all kinds of things to stay in control. And that's a healthy ego. That's how we have our sense of self and boundaries. And so we create for ourselves a sense of safety by keeping the illusion of being in control. My favorite way to do this is through knowledge. If I understand how things are and how they work, then I can anticipate and prepare for every bad thing that might happen. I'm in control. Or we can do it through wealth. This is my second favorite one. So that we can pay for the help that we need when bad things happen. Or through family relationships, so that we know there will be people who come to our aid when bad things happen. Or through lighter relationships than our family, so that we can, in fact, keeping our relationships so light that we can easily leave and go somewhere else if bad things happen. Or just plain through denial that bad things are going to happen. No, they're not going to happen. Things are going to be fine. There's no such thing as climate change. Or even through following very clear rules that we might attribute to God, because then God will keep bad things from happening. Do any of these sound familiar to you? I mean, these are all ones that I participate in. If you're like me, you even keep yourself distracted from noticing your own feelings, especially feelings about bad things. So, however we construct the illusion, our version of the illusion, we get so good at being in control, we're reluctant to release that control for any reason. And here's the rub. A life lived with God is like any other relationship. It's shared. In fact, in our relationship with God, all we control is our response. The desert mothers and fathers of the 4th and 5th century and all the contemplatives since then were well aware of that internal dynamic. And that's why they consistently describe 3 contemplative movements. They're not a progression. They're kind of 3 different places we can be moment by moment. The way that they name them varies a little bit, and I'm going to suggest some wording for you. The most frequent name for the first step is purgation. And I don't know about you, but that immediately makes me think of throwing up. So that's not a particularly helpful description of that movement. Prayer and throwing up, spiritual well-being and throwing up, no, they don't go together in my head. Maybe a better way to name the first movement is letting go of grasping, letting go of being in control. And when in those moments we have managed to let go of grasping, the second moment or movement is possible, and that's illumination. We can see ourselves, we can see the world around us, we can perhaps see God and our neighbors differently, in new light, we call it. So letting go of grasping and illumination. Both of those we know how to interrupt by holding on or by closing our eyes and refusing to be curious, refusing to see. But we can also put ourselves in a place where they're more likely to happen. The third movement, we don't control at all. And the third movement is union, being at one in the moment with what is, with the God who is present in and with us in what is. At one with ourselves, at one with the whole. Let me help you remember this. So we're going to do a tactile thing, so you need to play along with me. If you're watching this on video, you still need to play along. I invite you to find your keys. Just plain old, mine are my car keys and my house key. Just find your keys and hold them in your dominant hand. So just find your keys. I would tell you, so I'm asking you to hold a symbol, a tangible symbol of things that matter to you. I don't know about you, my car doesn't matter to me all that much, but my home does. You could use your cell phone, but we're going to drop these, and you probably don't want to drop your phone. So notice, I'm holding my keys. Notice that when I'm holding tight, when I'm grasping, if somebody asks me to let go of my grasp, I've lost the keys. And if I'm holding my keys and you tell me I should let go of my grasp, what am I more likely to do? I'm more likely to push back at you in refusal and hold on even tighter. Grasping is a kind of fist. But notice what happens if I make a simple move. If I just turn my wrist 90 degrees. Now, if you ask me to let go of grasping, and I open my hand, I still have what I value. It's still right there. It's not going anywhere. My keys are still safe in my hand. Try it. You don't have to lift your hand up and make everybody see it, but just notice how different that is and how easy it is to open your hand. That's letting go of grasping. And when we do that, notice what else is possible. Got that feather? Folks at home, we've got just little feathers. They're not anything special, they just came from the craft store. But I now can put that feather, that totally different thing, into my open hand. And I can look at those two things together. In illumination, the things we see together can help us see each of them differently. So I can notice the difference in weight between my keys and that feather. I can notice how easy it would be to lose the feather and how that's pretty okay with me, but losing my keys is not okay with me. I could notice the colors. I could notice the different kinds of shapes. I could think about the different things that the feather and the keys do. My keys aren't going to help me take flight. But the feather, I'm not going to fly off of one feather, but my spirit is going to fly if I puff it into the air. I won't do that so we don't have to clean up the sanctuary between now and the worship service, but you might try that outside. And just notice if you blow the feather, I expect it would make me giggle, actually. At least make me smile to watch it float and do its free and very different thing than my keys do. That's illumination. It's not letting go of the things that we value, but having let go of our tight grasp on them. Illumination allows us to see differently, to notice differently. And sometimes, when we've practiced letting go of grasping and we've noticed moments of illumination and pondered them, sometimes then we find that moments of union just come to us. Just come. Gerald May, in Will and Spirit, suggests to psychologists that experience of moments of union happens a dozen or 2 times a day for most people. And we are so good at grasping that we don't even notice that those moments have happened because we close them off so quickly. He argues that moments that you shake yourself and you say, oh, I've been daydreaming, that was a moment of union. And good for you, you at least noticed that it happened when it ended. Moments of union, of when our ego has let go, are the moments in which our hearts and our deepest spiritual selves are present with the God who is and the world that is and who we are. They are the perhaps quintessence of spiritual well-being. And if Jerry May is right, they happen a couple dozen times a day. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Notice what you feel when you shift from grasping your keys to opening your hand and laying that feather next to your keys. Notice what you feel in moments of illumination. clearly, the most difficult movement is the first one, letting go of grasping. So let me suggest to you several different tools that can make it, I won't say easy. Easier may sound like it's edging towards easy, and I don't mean that either, but make it more likely, maybe let's put it that way, that you can let go of grasping, at least in some moments, in some days. The first tool is to simply have a focus for a moment, a focus that you're going to just give yourself to. Now, I don't know whether you've had a chance to go out walking in the last 2 weeks, but in my neighborhood in southeast Denver, the trees are amazing this year. The color is just saturated and they're gorgeous. And I've found myself just walking through my neighborhood, breaking out into a smile as I notice a tree and beautiful. That's a letting go of grasping kind of moment because I've let myself just focus on that tree and let everything else go just for that moment. And then, because I'm the human that I am, I immediately say to myself, oh, that's beautiful, and how good it is, Kathy, that you're noticing that it's beautiful. Oops, and just took that whole experience of being at one right back. But at least I got the moment of the smile and the and I'm trying to practice, this is what I'm working on this week, I'm trying to practice going from the smile and the to which is edging closer to my ego being in charge, but it's staying with the present moment instead of thinking about it or congratulating myself for having the experience. So a focus can be as simple as the chime. And what's lovely about a singing bowl or some other kind of chime is that it lasts for longer than is comfortable, but shorter than, it's short enough so we can tolerate it. So when I ring this bowl, the sound continues for about 30 seconds. Notice. There. Now, I don't know about what your mind did during those 30 seconds, but mine went away and from this paying attention to the sound to thinking about how long folks on the video were going to hear it, because Zoom tends to kick out sounds like that after about 5 seconds. And then I drew myself back to the sound, and then what else did I think? I had 2 other thoughts that went away, and I brought myself back to the sound. And that's what the focus does for us. It helps us have something to return to come back to, so that we can let go of whatever showed up, offering itself as more important than just being present in this moment. You can purchase a chime or a singing bowl, but you can also just get Insight Timer, which is an app on your smartphone, and I timed them too. And they have 10 or 12 different chime sounds, and each of them lasts for about 30 seconds as well. And as we are being nice to ourselves, instead of expecting that we should suddenly be able to go do a 24-hour silent retreat and not have any intruding thoughts, we could actually just give ourselves the gift of 30 seconds at a time. Just 30 seconds at a time, periodically in the course of a day. Or maybe very intentionally at the beginning of a meal, or at the beginning of brushing your teeth, or when you first wake up, or as you're getting ready to go to sleep. Those moments with a focus give us practice in letting go of grasping. But they help us out by giving us something to focus on as we let go. So that's a tool. Second tool isn't going to sound like a tool to you, but it's an emotional tool. Create emotional safety for yourself. When I'm not feeling safe, holding my keys in my open hand doesn't seem like a good idea. When I'm walking across a parking lot with a drain and a grate nearby, I don't know about you, but I hold my keys tighter to make sure that I'm not going to lose them in one way or another. So another way of helping ourselves be able to let go of grasping is just to create emotional safety for ourselves. And I have a wonderful story about this. In my appointment when I was in northern Michigan, serving a congregation, I had a parishioner who was living in the county retirement facility, retirement nursing facility. And I went to visit her one day, as I did regularly, and found her in the PT room, and she was sitting with another one of my parishioners. I was serving 2 congregations at the time, and they were from 2 different congregations. But they knew each other well, and the PT, the physical therapist, was working with my other parishioner friend, and they were holding hands. And I was like, what's going on? And the PT explained, well, my older parishioner had really, really bad arthritis. Bad enough that it drew her hands into fists. And so she had managed to learn how to hold utensils and to eat and all of that by using what leverage she had in her thumbs to hold utensils. And that was working for her, but her fingernails were still growing. And that meant that if they couldn't help her hands relax enough to release her fingernails, they couldn't trim her fingernails, and she was going to start cutting herself with her fingernails driving into her hands, which just sounds awful to me. It looked pretty awful to look at it. So when I arrived, the physical therapist was just gently warming, using her own hands to gently warm the hands of this woman, one hand at a time. And it took 5 minutes or so just to transfer warmth from one of them to the other one, so that those fingers were warmed up enough that they could be very gently encouraged to move, very gently. And the whole time that this is happening, they're having a conversation with each other. They're talking about not just the weather, but they're talking about how they feel. They're talking about what is good in their lives. They're talking about what the nieces and nephews were doing. They're talking about what was happening in the community. We can provide that kind of gentle loosening, warming our own selves, and gently loosening what is clenched tight. We can do that for ourselves. It's lovely when others do it with us, but we can also do it for ourselves. And often we do that by things that we say to ourselves. So we can say, this is my favorite at the moment, I'm okay the way I am. Or we can quote scripture from Isaiah 43. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. I don't know about you, but that's a warm hug for me. Or we can remember one of the many stories of Jesus from Mark 10 and his conversation with the rich young man who had come to speak to him. The text says, Jesus looked at him, looked at her, looked at them, and loved them. We can say those things to ourselves intentionally, regularly, just to create space in which we feel safer. Because we're not going to ungrasp until we're feeling at least a little safe in this moment. So that's a tool, talking to yourself. Third tool, we can reframe feeling lost as being normal. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a fairly good sense of direction, and so I don't get lost very often. And when I am lost, I am terrified. And I do all kinds of grasping. Well, geographically, I've not gotten lost a whole lot in the last year and a half because I haven't gone anywhere. But metaphorically, I've felt lost a lot in the last 18 months. And I learned something, we learn something from sermons almost every week, don't we? I learned something from my preacher, my pastor, last Sunday. Turns out Andy Dunning, who's the pastor at University Park United Methodist Church, Andy has a terrible sense of direction, and he gets lost all the time. And so he just described for us last week how he has, over time, decided not to give himself a hard time about being lost because it's going to happen, but instead has accepted, okay, sometimes I'm going to feel lost, sometimes I'm actually going to be lost, and then what? Well, that had never occurred to me as a way of dealing with being lost. And what he pointed out is that if you're out in the wilderness, now I'm tied enough to wanting to know exactly where I am that the thought of going out into the wilderness, hiking, knowing that I'm likely to get lost in the process, like, why would I do that? But Andy wants to be out in the wilderness, and so he's learned that when you get lost in the wilderness, once you pause and say to yourself, I think I'm lost now. He said suddenly everything around you becomes more vivid. You start paying attention to this moment, where I am, what the sounds are, what the smells are, what I can see around me. And he said, and you suddenly see this moment very differently when you're lost. He said, It's almost like being lost is a gift. But he also noted that when we accept, okay, I'm lost now, I'm feeling lost now, that we're able then to notice what is around us in ways that can help us not be lost, even if we haven't moved at all. That part of the lostness is the panic, the grasping that we've been doing. So if we normalize feeling lost, what I mean by that is just accept that it happens. Now, maybe you are not like Andy and you don't regularly lose your car in the grocery parking lot. I don't. But I have certainly felt emotionally lost a number of times in the last 18 months. And it has helped me unclench to be able to say to myself, oh, this is normal, Kathy, to feel lost because so much has changed. It doesn't look familiar anymore. And when I normalize that feeling, I'm able to unclench, and illumination comes. I begin to see what actually is there, what is present. Not just what is lost, but what is accompanying and who is accompanying me. So that's a third tool. Fourth tool. We, particularly folks my age and younger, live our lives on high alert almost all of the time. So I would not say that I'm a person addicted to my smartphone, except when I'm being honest with myself and I notice that the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is turn it on. And the next thing I do is I run through, so did I get any work email? Did I get any personal email? Do I remember what my schedule is for today? And what's the top thing in the news? Do I need to know what's going on in the world? And by the time I've done those four things, I'm on a roll, and then I'm starting to look around my screen and say, okay, now what else do I have to look at? Now, I'm not addicted to my smartphone. But that kind of urgent attention outside of myself is a form of being on high alert. And that triggers our physical response systems. I bet your speaker last week spoke to this a little bit. So we have choices about whether or not we constantly trigger ourselves into being on high alert. My other favorite thing to do, I don't have the TV on very often, but any important story that CPR has run in the last 24 hours, I have probably heard 4 or 5 times. I've heard it at least twice from the morning CPR, and then I've heard it again when it's rebroadcast nationally, and then I hear it again in the evening, and then I hear it in the summary, or I see it in the phone app that's on my phone for CPR. I have the radio on to keep me company every time I eat a meal. What am I doing? I'm distracting myself. I'm staying on high alert to distract myself from noticing that it doesn't always feel great to be eating alone. I'm distracting myself from noticing what is happening right here, right now. And when we live our lives on high alert, our bodies tell our brains, grasp, grasp, grasp. And it becomes very difficult then to let go of grasping. So another tool that we can use is to make intentional choices about trying to lower the amount of time that we spend on high alert so that we only spend time on high alert when it's really needed. It is not really needed when I'm eating breakfast. At least it wasn't today. But I had the radio on anyway. So making some choices about high alert can help us. And then finally, the fifth one, you can choose not to put yourself in situations in which you will feel trapped. And this is particularly helpful to be thinking about now in October as we're making plans toward holidays. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Intentionally making choices not to put yourself in places or moments when you will feel trapped. Maybe the guest room isn't available this Christmas. Or maybe I'm only going to join the toxic people in my life for dessert on Zoom this year. Making choices in advance not to put myself in places where I have to be on high alert and I can't let go of grasping and just be present in the moment. Brian Russell, in a lovely little book that just came out about a month ago called Centering Prayer, Sitting Quietly in God's Presence Can Change Your Life. Russell describes centering prayer a little bit differently than Father Keating does. He describes it as simply spending time with God with the intention to have an open heart. Intending to have an open heart while hanging out with God. So the only tool needed for this prayer is a name for God or a word to return to when our minds wander, much like I was describing earlier using the sound of the chime as a thing to return to. Names like thou or Jesus or Lord or beloved, peace, friend, Savior. Any of the biblical names of God, of course, work. A name that evokes your feelings of safety works best. So I don't use Lord. I'm more likely to use thou or beloved. Our ego will take a while, like a lifetime, to get used to this kind of prayer, which is why it's about intention rather than accomplishment. Thoughts will come when we just sit in the presence of God. Thoughts like regrets from the past, or fears about the future, or the itch right there that just insists it needs attention. But when we notice that a thought has appeared, we accept that it's appeared. There you go again, brain. Trying to be in control again. Russell says to us, 4 R's: resist no thought, let it come. Then retain no thought, let it go. And react to no thought. Don't stay with it. And then finally, his 4th R, return to the safe name and just this moment of being together. If the thought hurt, maybe even saying something like, I'm okay. I'm with you right now, Lord. What's interesting about this prayer practice is that over time, we become more comfortable being present in the moment. Not just being present to God, but being present in the moment, regardless of what's happening in that moment. actually being fully present in moments when we aren't praying, at least not consciously. And that allows us to start noticing more and more about the people with whom we are sharing this moment. Intending to open our hearts, just intending to open our hearts and hang out with God. It allows us to be more aware of our neighbors, both the near ones and the far ones, the human ones, and all of the creatures, the earth. So let me circle back around to the question, what is spiritual well-being? And answer the question with yet a different set of words. Spiritual resilience, or spiritual well-being, is the ability to return again and again to be present in this moment and notice it just as it is. And that allows us to notice our neighbors and to notice God is here too, wherever here happens to be right now. Return again and again to being present in this moment so that we can notice our neighbors and notice our God. I'll conclude with the most radical thing I'm going to say all morning. I think that God is making the pandemic be a spiritual gift to folks like you and me. I'm not saying God sent the pandemic. I don't think that's true. But I think God can change and make good out of anything. And I think God is making a spiritual gift out of the pandemic for folks like you and me who are relatively safe. The pandemic shattered the illusions we have that we are in control of our lives. We aren't, and we never have been. But we've held on to the illusion, and we couldn't let go of grasping while we hung on to that illusion. Our grasping always gets in the way of our spiritual well-being. The truth is, we are safe enough in this moment, this morning, in this place, while you're watching, whenever you're watching this video. You are safe enough to let go of grasping in this moment. So to play with words, spiritual well-being is actually beyond our grasp in our open hands and our open hearts. So I didn't leave much time for questions and answers. Oops. What questions or what reservations do you have? And for the sake of the video, in the live stream, I invite you to come to the microphone. There are lots of things you could push back at. All right. May the feather remind you of laughter if you blow it into the wind when you walk outside, or if it sits on your dresser somewhere or in the jar where you keep your keys. May it remind you that it is possible to let go of grasping. Illumination comes, and so does union. Thanks be to God.